And Christian McCaffrey, bad news for him and for the Panthers. An injury yesterday that we didn't even know about during the game. I mean, he looked banged up. They never announced that he was injured, possibly because he won't let the trainers get anywhere near him during the game because he's determined to keep playing. He left in a boot. X-rays were negative. And now out of the blue today, Charean, Panthers announced he's done for the year. He's on injured reserve with an ankle injury. A stunning development for a team that, even though they got completely outclassed by the Dolphins yesterday, were still alive for a playoff berth in the NFC.
And Mike, over the last 2 seasons when he's played, you can just see what a difference he makes to that team. And I actually had that game yesterday. That was one of my games. And so I was watching it, and he's on the sideline, and they're saying, well, he might come back. And so I was waiting for our former coworker, Darren Gant, who now works for the Panthers, to post something about what the team was going to say. And they said, well, the Panthers have confirmed that he did roll the ankle in the first half, but he's good to come back. Ended up playing one play in the second half, didn't have a touch in the second half, 10 carries in the first half, and, by the way, had his streak of catches end at 57 consecutive games with a catch in the games that he's played. He didn't have a catch yesterday, so that's out the door. But bigger for the Panthers is they're not going to have him the rest of the season. Probably a cautionary tale, Mike, of not to pay running backs big money based on what they've gotten out of him since he signed that contract before the start of the 2020 season.
Well, but let's take it one step farther. It's a cautionary tale not to use the 8th overall pick in the draft on Christian McCaffrey.
True.
A team
Yes.
that is so obsessed with finding a franchise quarterback could have had Patrick Mahomes. Now, I know that they had Cam Newton at the time, and it would have been hard to justify throwing him overboard. He was just a couple of years removed from being the league MVP. But still, if you use a top 10 pick on a running back, you basically are committing to, if he checks the boxes, as McCaffrey did, 2017, 2018, 2019, and he had along the way the first 1,000-yard rushing and 1,000-yard receiving season since Marshall Faulk, I believe. And I think it's Faulk and Roger Craig are the only ones to have ever done that. I remember that being a thing.
That's
although
right. You're right.
The days, the weeks, and the months, especially since the pandemic started, it's all one big cluster for me. But and look, I understand that we can find running backs anywhere and everywhere. But when you put that guy's name on the card at 8 overall, you are committing yourself to eventually paying him. The Giants would be in that position with Saquon Barkley right now if he hadn't been injured throughout his first 4 NFL seasons, 18, 19, 20, and into 21. He was healthy, I think, in 18. The problem started in 19. McCaffrey, don't be mad at Christian McCaffrey, because he had, and I don't mean you, Charean, I mean whoever's listening, 3 years of high-end performance. And the way that they've set up the rookie wage scale as of 2011, because there were too many Ryan Leafs and Jamarcus Russells who were sucking millions out of the system without ever earning a penny of it. We can't have these busts that are taking all this money that could go to veterans. That was the pitch to the union, and the veterans got on board with it. It was like, hey, yeah, screw the rookies. They're not part of us. Let's take money from them, and they'll maybe give it to us. Whether or not that's been the case is a different issue altogether. But for the rookies, you earn your first contract. You earn the first contract you didn't get your early years of your career. And McCaffrey, I think, was ready to take a stand after 3 seasons. And I think the Panthers knew he was ready to take a stand, and they decided to get ahead of it, and they paid him $16 million a year. And they had no reason to think that he was going to have all these injury issues, apart from the fact that that's the nature of the position. This isn't about Christian McCaffrey being injury-prone. This is about him playing a position that is prone to injury. So you don't make a running back the 8th overall pick in the draft, because that puts you in position to pay him if he does have 3 solid years like McCaffrey did. It's that simple. So, Charean, this problem didn't start when they signed him to the contract. The problem started when they decided to put his name on a card when they had the 8th overall pick in 2017.
Yeah, and as you said, Mike, they're still searching for that franchise quarterback, and they're going to go back to the drawing board after this season to try to find that guy again when they could have had him instead of taking Christian McCaffrey. Always take the quarterback over the running back. I mean, that just seems like a no-brainer. Go back to the Giants with Saquon Barkley, and now the Panthers with Christian McCaffrey. And there are other examples of that for sure. There's no question. But you always take the franchise quarterback first. And when you have that, you can build around that guy with whatever running backs you can find. Look what the Titans did yesterday. And hey, I love Derrick Henry. I think he needed to be paid. He's lived up to them paying him, all of that. So this isn't a knock on Derrick Henry at all, but I'm saying the Titans had 2 rushers over 100 yards yesterday, and they weren't named Derrick Henry, and they weren't named Christian McCaffrey. But if you have that franchise quarterback, you can build around him with other running backs. Now, receivers, I guess, are a little bit harder when you look at what the Titans struggle with catching the ball and getting open down the field. But if you have that quarterback, Mike, you can have any running backs and still succeed in this league. I think that's been proved.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, but it seems like teams still fall into that trap where they fall in love with a running back when they're in the top 10. And this is another part of it as well. And this isn't a specific knock on the Giants, although the shoe may fit, or the Jaguars in 2017 when they took Leonard Fournette with the 4th overall pick, although the shoe may fit, or the Panthers pre-David Tepper, although the shoe may fit. Dysfunctional teams do dysfunctional things. And in a league of 32 teams, all it takes is one with a ticket in the top 10 to get infatuated with a high-end running back and roll the dice instead of recognizing we can find somebody in round 2 or 3 or 4 or not at all. We can go find a great running back. And the irony in Jacksonville is the same GM that picked Leonard Fournette 4th overall found James Robinson completely and totally undrafted. And Robinson has been far better for the Jaguars. Not far better, but better for the Jaguars than Fournette ever was. And Robinson has come a whole lot cheaper. So it's a cautionary tale that we shouldn't have to tell. We should know this by now. And it's surprising to me that there are still teams like the Giants in 2018. This is one of the reasons why Dave Gettleman's going to be out in New York after the season. And the Giants, by the way, have done nothing to push back against the Sunday Splash report that came from NFL media. Not the general NFL media. Sometimes people get confused. No, the media conglomerate owned in part by the Giants reported that Gettleman is out, and the Giants haven't said boo about it. That means he is out. And one of the reasons he's out is because he took Saquon Barkley when he could have had, Josh Allen. Not that Allen is a front runner for MVP currently, but he's been far better than Daniel Jones has been. And, does that mean that the Giants would have been able to develop him? I don't know. But the point is, don't use a top 10 pick. Don't use a top 20 pick. Don't use a first-round pick at all on a running back, with one exception. If you're very low in the round and there's a guy you really love, you get him for 5 years. And frankly, 5 years, you may let him walk then. Or you franchise tag him for 1 year, and then you let him walk. But that big second contract, hard to justify it. But you're far more likely to have to give the guy the second contract if you take him, let's say, in the top half of round 1, or the top 20 if he ends up being a great player. What do you do? Why'd you take him if you're not going to pay him? That's how it works. You use the first round pick on the lottery ticket, and you hope that it works. And when it works, you let him walk away. Well, no. Why'd you take him? So, I wonder if teams are going to learn their lesson. And number one, continue to use high picks, and number 2, continue to pay big money. And the other reality too, Charean, and this relates to Dalvin Cook and the fact that he's going to miss time with a shoulder injury, and it's a tough position to play. You're going to get injured. But he's one of the guys who got paid. There was a flurry of them who weren't first-round picks who got big contracts. It was Dalvin Cook. It was Alvin Kamara. It was Joe Mixon. It was Derrick Henry. There may be one more that I'm missing in that group. But, the reality is, for running backs that work out well to start their careers, the only team that's ever going to pay them big money is the team that's already invested emotionally. The fan base is invested emotionally in them. You hit the open market and you're not getting big money. And I wonder when teams are going to just say, like the Cowboys did with DeMarco Murray. No,
I was
thanks.
just going to bring him up. Yep.
And we're done. We're moving on.
Yeah, and then they ended up using a top 5 pick, whatever it was, on Zeke, which they shouldn't have done. But yeah, they let DeMarco Murray walk, and that ended up being the right decision for them, even though he had led the league in rushing. They let him walk away and go to the Eagles, and he took what he could get from the Eagles, and it didn't work out there. He was at the end of his career. So maybe that's what you need to do, Mike. You take that running back and you use him up for 4 years, and you let him walk away and go somewhere else for more money than what you're willing to pay him. And go draft one or get one in free agency or however it works out. You look at a team like the 49ers, my gosh, how many running backs have they gone through over the last 2 or 3 years? And frankly, most of those backs are pretty darn good backs. I think a lot of teams in the NFL would take some of their running backs. They drafted Elijah Mitchell this year after they drafted Trey Sermon in the 3rd round. Mitchell's been far better than Trey Sermon this year. And so I just think you can find those running backs. We know our coworker MDS likes taking running backs late or getting them in the free agent market, and I think he's right. I think history has shown, recent history at least, that you can get those running backs later in the draft or in free agency and still be as good or better off than taking that running back early in the draft.
I think one of the challenges as well is don't let one guy become the star. Don't let one guy become the fan favorite. Don't let one guy become so important to your team that you have no choice but to give him a big contract. You're better off with the revolving door with 2 or 3 different guys. Like the 49ers, at any given moment, you're like, I don't know who the starting running back is. That's kind of been the vibe the last few years. Like, is it Raheem Mostert? Is it Jerick McKinnon? Is it Matt Breida? Is it this guy? Is it that guy? And it's kind of like the New England approach. You never quite know who that guy is going to be, and a lot of it's matchup driven, but that's a way to avoid ever being in a position where you have to overpay a running back. So it is something to keep in mind. And, it reminds me of the Mike Shanahan experience in Denver with all these different running backs that we've seen do well with San Francisco. Now, it was injury-driven, but it was, and let me make sure I get all these guys. It went Terrell Davis, Orlandis Gary, Mike Anderson. Like, it was every year they had a 1,000-yard rusher. It was a different guy every year. Just plug them in and go. So, we're not general managers, and no one seeks our advice in that regard. But if we can see it, Charean, if we know it, if we get it, then maybe every team will figure it out at some point.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.